In this Blender tutorial, I'll show you how to create these procedural candle materials. So in this video, I'll show you how to create this procedural candle flame material, and then also this wax candle material. And so in the video, as well as creating the procedural material, we'll be joining it together into these node groups so that you can control the look of the material. And then we're also going to have this animatable value, so you can animate the candle flame and just kind of make it moving around slightly. So this animate noise value is going to animate some noise, and the noise is going into the displacement, so it's going to kind of move the mesh around and make the flame look like it's just wobbling around a little bit. Now I'm going to be doing this tutorial in cycles because I'm going for realism. However, it actually does look pretty good in Blender Eevee, so if you want to use the Eevee rendering engine you can, but I'll be using cycles. And if you'd like to purchase the finished tutorial project files, you can get that with the links in the description. In the project files, you'll get this finished Blender file with the candle model and the flame model, and you'll get these two customizable procedural materials. You can also check out my ultimate Blender procedural material pack if you'd like to purchase all of my procedural materials. So my ultimate material pack comes with all of my procedural materials pre-set up for Blender's asset browser with custom thumbnails, sorted catalogs, and customizable node groups. And you can also purchase all of my materials individually on my Gumroad store. And to learn how to create more procedural materials, you can check out my Blender procedural material tutorial playlist. Before we continue with the tutorial, I wanted to let you know about Blender Market's winter sale, which is going on from February 25th through March 3rd of 2025. All of my products on the Blender Market will be 25% off during the sale. So now is a great time to purchase some courses, products, or add-ons. So here in a new scene in Blender, let's just delete everything, and I'm first going to start by modeling a candle. Now if you already have a candle object, then you can use the timestamps in the video description just to jump to the part where I create the materials, but I'm first going to be modeling a basic candle. So I'll go to the add menu, and I'm just going to add a cylinder. And I'll scale the cylinder down by a 0.08, so I'll type 0.08 and hit enter, and then I'll hit the period key to zoom into the cylinder. That's a lot better size when modeling to the real life scale in Blender, and I'll press Ctrl A and apply the scale, so that's the default size of the object. Then I'll go into edit mode and I'll select everything and I'll scale everything, and I'll hit Z to scale it on the Z axis, and I'll type 1.4. So just 1.4 and enter. Then I'll go to front view and I'll bring the object up on the Z axis just like that, so it's resting there on that grid on the ground. Let's save our project, so I'll click on File and Save. So I'm now going to hit Control 4. Control 4 is going to add a subdivision surface with 4 levels, and on the render and viewport, I'll turn both of them up to 4. Then I'll go into edit mode, and I'm going to go down here to the bottom, and I'll go to the face select, and I'll just select this face, and I'll hit the I key to inset the faces, and then hit the I key again to inset the faces. Then I'll hit Control R to add a loop cut, and I'll drag this loop cut down here just to kind of sharpen up the end. And then I'll hit Control R again, and just add this right here, just drag a loop cut right up there to sharpen that. Then I'll go to the face select and select the top face, and I'll hit I to inset, and then I'll hit E to extrude and S to scale, and then bring it down on the Z axis, and then E to extrude, S to scale, bring it down the Z axis again, and then we'll just hit the I key to inset that so that the top of the candle kind of comes in a little bit. So why I added the subsurf modifier to make it really detailed is because I'm going to be sculpting the object, because I'm going to make kind of those little lumps and dribbles on a candle. So let's click on the drop down, and we're going to apply the subsurf modifier. Let's now click over here to go to sculpt mode. So if you go to the sculpting workspace, this will take you into sculpt mode of the selected object. And I'm going to click right over here to go to the draw brush. And I'll hit the F key to make my brush bigger. And for the sculpting, I'm going to be using this Wacom pad tablet. I find that it's a lot easier to use a tablet than a mouse, so I'll be using this tablet. So I'm going to start by just going around here and just creating some little bumps. So definitely look at reference images of candles. And I'm just going to make like some little bumps here, and then you can hold down the Control key and sculpt in to kind of push this away, kind of where the candle's melted, because this is where the flame is. Then what I'm going to do is make like some bigger lumpy areas, kind of like this. What I'm also going to do is turn on the Dyn Topo, click on OK, so it adds geometry as we sculpt. And on the Dyn Topo settings, let's turn the detail size maybe to like a 5. And now I can sculpt along here. It's just going to add a bit more detail as we sculpt. And then you can also hold down the Shift key as you're sculpting to kind of smooth it out. So holding down the Shift key is going to switch to the smooth brush. And if you do want to check out my sculpting for beginners tutorial, I'll have a link to that in the description. Just going to make some bigger lumpy areas. Another thing you could do is you could go to the inflate brush. This might work pretty well. Make your brush a little bit bigger. You can change the radius and the strength of your brush right up here, and you can use this to kind of inflate it, to kind of make it blobbing out to look like the candle wax has kind of melted down here along the sides. Then what I'll do is press the F key to make my brush smaller, and then I'm going to make like some little dribbles. So go along here, just sculpt in some little dribbles of the candle wax kind of dribbling down. You can also hold down the control key as you sculpt to kind of sculpt in some little creases. So this is the finished model that I've created. So you can see we have these little dribbles here, these little parts that go in, and then kind of some big round lumpy spots, and then some nice big spots kind of lumpy around the edges. So let's go back to the layout. So I'll now go to the add menu, and I'm going to go down here to camera and just add a camera, and then I'll move my view to right about here, and I'll hit Control Alt Numpad 0 to bring the camera to my view. And also if you select the camera and go over here to the object data properties, I'm going to turn the focal length up to 80 just to kind of zoom the camera in a little bit. And also if we go up here to the render properties, actually the output properties, I want to change the resolution X and Y to 1920. So that way it's a square image. And then I can just kind of move the camera around, stick it right there. So let's hold down the Z button, we'll go into the rendered viewport mode, and as I mentioned, I'm going to be using the Cycles rendering engine. You definitely could use Eevee if you want to, but I'll be using Cycles for more realism. So in the rendered view, let's now click over here to go to the world properties, and I'll click on the X here to delete the world, so it's fully black. I'm now going to go to the add menu, and I'm going to add some lights. So I'll go to light, and I'll add an area light, and I'll bring the light up, and let's rotate it over. We're just going to stick it kind of right over here. So it's kind of going to be a nice rim light on the back, and that's also going to make a cool effect where light is shining through the wax candle, so it'll kind of make the candle look like it's glowing, and you'll be able to see the subsurface scattering of the candle. Let's go here to the object data properties, and here on the power, I'm going to turn this light up to a 30. Then I'll duplicate this light. Let's maybe rotate it, so double tap the R key to use the trackball rotation. Let's just kind of stick this other light right up here, and this one I'll turn the power down to maybe like a 20. Now let's go to the add menu. We're going to go to mesh, and I'm going to add a plane, and let's scale the plane up a little bit. And then if we go into edit mode, let's go back to solid view. We can go to the edge select, and we can select the edge. We can extrude it up on the Z axis. And then if we select this middle edge again, I'll hit Control B to add a bevel. And then I'm going to scroll my mouse wheel until there are lots of cuts, and then just click right there just to place that. And maybe I'll scale the entire thing up in object mode, move it back a little bit, and then we can just shade the object smooth. So now we have just a nice backdrop to preview the candle. So we'll select the ground plane. Let's go over here to the shading workspace, and I'll just be creating a very simple material for the ground plane. So I'll click on new. I can just call this background. And for the color of the background, I'm going to make it kind of this nice dark red color. And here's the hex value if you want to punch in the same exact color. Then what I'll do is turn the roughness all the way up to 1, and then so that there's less reflections, let's open up the specular, and we'll turn the specular all the way to 0. Now another thing I want to do to make the scene look a lot nicer is to go to the render properties, and we're going to scroll right down here, and we're going to open up the color management. And on the view transform, I'm going to use Filmic, because I find that the AGX color management, which is the default in Blender, it kind of makes the yellow parts not quite as bright, so you can't really see the yellow color of the flame quite as nice. So instead of using AGX, I'm going to use Filmic because I find you can see the color of the flame a lot better. And then here on the look, I'm going to change this to very high contrast, so it makes it very sharp and contrasty, and that looks a lot nicer. So make sure in the shading workspace, I'm now going to select the candle object. Let's click on new to add a new material, and let's call this wax candle. And then I will also be using the Node Wrangler add-on, so if you don't have that enabled, you can click on edit, go to the preferences, and over here on the add-ons tab, you can just search for Node Wrangler and just enable the Node Wrangler add-on, and then I will show you how to use it in the video. So we'll just close the user preferences. So to make the candle material, I'm first going to make kind of this nice bright kind of tannish color. And here's the hex value if you want to punch in the same exact color. Then let's turn the roughness down to make it a little bit shiny. So I'll turn the roughness to like a 0.3. Now to really make it look like candle wax, we need to add some subsurface scattering to make it look really soft and make it look like light is shining through the wax. So let's open up the subsurface right here, and I'll turn the weight all the way up to 1, and now you can see there's lots of light kind of going through the wax, so it looks really soft. Now to make the subsurface look a little bit better, I find that clicking right here and changing the method to this top one, I don't know how to pronounce this, Tristensen Burley, I find that this one works the best for candle wax out of all of these three. Now here on the radius, we have the red, green, and blue values, so if you turn each one of these up, it's going to change the color of the subsurface. But what I want to do is add a subsurface color. Now what I could do is just search for an RGB node and put the color into the radius, and then I could change the color. So I could make it kind of like like a kind of tannish, kind of yellowish color. But this RGB node isn't going to work in a customizable node group because it doesn't have any socket here which I can plug into the group output. So I'm going to delete this and I'm going to instead search for a mix color. Let's drop the mix color right here, and I'm going to put the result into the radius. Now the factor is going to blend between using color A or color B, so I'm going to turn the factor all the way up to 1 so it's fully using color B. So now I can just make color A fully black. If I Control Shift select the mix here, you can see if it's 0 it's going to use black, if it is 1 it's going to use color B, which is white. So now we can make this be the custom color for the subsurface color. So let's just preview the principled shader again. And for this, I'm just going to make it kind of like a peachy tannish color. And here's the hex value if you want to punch in the same exact color that I'll be using. Now there's also this scale value on the subsurface scattering. So if I turn this up more light is going to go through the object. So I find that turning this value to a 0.3 looks pretty good. Now I also want to add just a very subtle bump over the surface, so we're going to search for a noise texture. Let's drop this here, and then because we turned on the node wrangler, you can select the noise texture, and you can hit Control T, and that's going to add the texture coordinate mapping. And let's take the object coordinates and put that into the vector, because the object coordinates is going to place the procedural texture on the object more evenly. So we can now Control Shift select the noise texture to preview it. So let's change some of the noise texture settings. So I'm going to turn the scale up to 7, and I'll turn the detail up to 10 so it's more detailed, and I'll also turn the roughness to a 0.7 so it's even more detailed. So now let's take the noise texture factor, we're going to put that into the normal, and then let's Control Shift select the principled shader, and then to convert this to normal data we need to search for a bump node, and we'll put the bump node between the noise texture and the principled shader, and we want the factor to be going into the height value of the bump. So now you can see the surface looks really bumpy. But I want to make it very subtle, so I'll turn the bump strength to a 0.05. So that way it's just going to have just a tiny little bit of bump on the surface. So that's it for the procedural material, so let's now join it together into a node group. So I'll click and drag to box select all the nodes, accept the material output, and I'll hit Control G to join it together into a node group. And I'll hit the tab key to go outside the node group. I can copy the material name, and let's just paste it here into the node group, and I'll just make the node group bigger. Let's drag it over here, and then I'll hit the tab key to go into the node group, and I'll hit the End key to open up the side panel. And here on the group sockets, I'll just rename this to shader because I like that better. So now we have this group input, and we can plug up all the customizable values to the group input. So let's drag the group input right over here, and I'm first going to plug the base color into the extra socket and the roughness into the extra socket. Let's also take the weight here of the subsurface, put that into the extra socket, and let's take this scale value and put that into the extra socket. Let's also drag this down here, and we can take this mix color, color B, we can put that to the extra socket. Let's double click on this to rename it, and I'll rename this to subsurface color. Then let's add the noise settings. So let's drag this behind the noise, and I can put the scale and the detail into the extra socket. And if I drag this down here, let's double click on this to rename it. I'll call this noise scale, and this one here, I'm going to call this noise detail. And then also let's take the roughness, put that into the extra socket, and I'll rename this to noise roughness. And then I want to take the bump strength, so we'll take the strength, and we'll put that into the extra socket, and then I can just rename this to bump strength. So let's just hit the End key to close the side panel, and I'll hit tab to go outside the node group. So we have the base color of the candle, so you could do like a blue candle, a red candle, whatever candle color you want. We also have the roughness of the wax. We also have the subsurface that really makes it look like candle wax. We also have the subsurface scale, and then we have the subsurface color. Then we have some noise settings like the noise scale, detail, and roughness, and then finally we have the bump strength, which is just a little bit of bump over the surface. So let's now model a candle wick. So I'm going to go back here to the layout, and I'll go to solid view, and I'll just be modeling a little black candle wick. So I'll go to the add menu, let's go to mesh, and I'm going to add a cylinder. And before I move the cylinder around, I'm going to click here on the add cylinder settings, and on the vertices, I'm just going to turn this to 12 so it is lower detailed because we don't need that much detail. Let's now scale the object way down and bring it up, and then scale the object way down and kind of zoom in here so you can kind of see it better. And then in edit mode, I'm going to scale it up on the Z-axis, and then back in object mode, let's just bring it right down here into the center of the candle. And then what I'll do is hit the 5 on the numpad to go to orthographic view, and I can just zoom in even closer. I also need to hit Control A and apply the object scale. And then let's go into edit mode, and we need to hit Shift N to recalculate the normals. And then if we go to this face select and select this face, I will extrude the face up and kind of rotate it, extrude it and rotate it. And we're just going to continue to do that to kind of make it rotating over. Let's now shade the object smooth. Then I'll go back into edit mode and I'll hit the I key to inset this face right here, and I'll inset it twice, and then I'll just hit Control R to add another loop right there. So now you can see that edge looks a lot more sharp. And then if we hit 5 on the numpad to go out of orthographic view, let's go down here to the bottom and go back into edit mode. And if we just go to the face select and select the bottom face, we'll just hit X and delete the faces. So now that bottom part looks a lot more sharp. Let's now add a very simple material to this. So I'll go to the materials. Let's click on new, and I can call this Wick. And then we can take the base color and I can just make it fully black. And you can go into the rendered view to see how that's looking. I'm going to select the wick and just kind of rotate it over just a little bit like that. So now let's model the candle flame. So I'll go to the add menu and I'm going to add a UV sphere. And then right behind me on the UV sphere settings, I'm going to turn the segments to 12. So I'm turning the segments to 12 and the rings I'll turn to 10. So it's much lower poly. And I'll close the sphere settings. Let's scale the object way down, bring it up, and scale it way down. Let's zoom into the object, just make it really small. And then if I go into edit mode, in edit mode, we're going to scale it up so it's quite a bit longer, kind of bring it up just like that. And then bring the entire object down in object mode, and then back in edit mode we'll scale it up a bit more. Let's go to the vertex select and I'll go into wireframe. We're just going to deselect everything and we're just going to box select the top, maybe bring it up a little bit, box select this part, bring that up a little bit, and kind of scale and stretch out the top part. So bring that up there, bring that down a little bit, and then if we select some of these bottom loops, let's kind of bring these loops down, maybe select the entire thing on the bottom, just kind of flatten it just a little bit. You can also add a few loop cuts, so I'll just hit Control R to add some loop cuts just to give it a little bit more geometry, so the geometry is a little bit more even. And then we'll shade the object smooth. Then I'll hit Control 2 to add a subdivision surface. That's going to make it the levels and viewport both set to 2 so it has more geometry. So with the object selected, let's go here to the shading workspace and I will click on new to add a new material, and I can just call this candle flame. So I'm going to select the principled shader and I'll hit X to delete it, and I'm going to search for an emission shader and we'll Control Shift select the emission shader to preview it. So now you can see the candle is emitting light. So I now want to create a gradient so that the color changes down the candle. So I'll go to the add menu and I'll search for a gradient texture. Let's stick it here, and I can Control Shift select it to preview it. And with the gradient selected, I'll hit Control T to add the texture coordinate and mapping nodes. And I'm going to use the object coordinate, so I'll put the object into the vector. Now you can see that there's the gradient, so it's black over here and white over here, but I want to make it be the opposite direction, so it's black down here and then gets white up at the top. So what I can do is take this rotation value, the Y rotation, and I can type in 90. This way it's going to be white up here and then really dark down here. And then I want to keep my nodes very nicely organized so I can remember what everything does. So I'm going to box select these two nodes and I'll hit Control J to add them into a frame, and I'll press F2 to give it a label, and I'm just going to call this mapping. So now right here after the gradient, I want to customize the gradient because I want to change the colors and kind of change the contrast. So first I'm going to search for a color ramp. We'll put it here after the gradient, and then what I want to do is just drag the white tab way over so it's very contrasty. So just bring it over kind of like that. And then I want to create some custom colors, so I'm going to search for a mix color, and I'll put this after the color ramp, and the color of the color ramp is going to go into the factor. So now we can change the two colors for color A and color B. So for color A, I'm going to go with this nice bright orange color, and here's the hex value that I'm using. And then for color B, I'm going to use kind of this nice bright yellow color, and here is the hex value. Now you can see the gradient is really sharp and I don't like that, so you could of course drag this color ramp back to make it less sharp, but why this is happening is because I forgot to apply the object scale. So select the object, hit Control A, and apply the object scale. Now you can see when I drag this around, you can see it's way too orange, so if I drag this color ramp over, that's going to make it much more contrasty. So now you can see it's kind of yellow, and then right down here it's more of a red color at the bottom. So let's box select these three nodes, the gradient, color ramp, and mix. I'll hit Control J and then hit F2, and I can just call this gradient. So if you look at real images of candles, you might notice that kind of that strong orangey color is kind of seen on the edges and right down here, but it's not really seen in the middle. So what I want to do is mix in another texture, which is going to kind of add this kind of orangey red to the edges. So to do this, I'm going to search for the layer weight node. And if I Control Shift select the layer weight, you can see it's darker in the middle and then lighter on the edges. Now what I want to do is search for a color ramp to change the colors and make it more contrasted. So we'll drop the color ramp right here, and I'm going to flip both of these values. And then I'll drag the white tab over here, and I'll drag the black tab right over there. So now you can see it's black on the outside, but white on the inside. So we can now mix this into the base color. So I'm going to search for another mix color. We'll drop this here, and we can take the color ramp color, and we can put that into the factor. Then we're going to take this gradient mix, and we're going to put that into color B. And then for color A, we can just click and drag and drop this color and drop it right here. So now you can see it's yellow in the middle and then orange on the edges and the bottom. So let's box select these 3 nodes, hit Ctrl J, and then hit F2 to give it a label, and I'll just call this edges. So now what we can do is just drop the emission right here. So make sure that this mix result is going into the emission color. So now that color will be emitting light. So now what I want to do is make the candle be brighter on the very inside, but then here on the bottom, I want it to be less bright. So to do this, we are going to search for another color ramp, and we'll drop it right down here, and I'll just preview the color ramp. So now what I can do is take this gradient color and we'll put that into the factor. So now you can kind of see the gradient. And then what I'm going to do is drag these values over like this, and I'll make it really sharp, kind of like we've done before. But then I'm going to take this black color, and I want to take the black color here and make it a nice light gray. And if you want to punch in the same exact hex value, you can punch in this hex value right here for the light gray. So now we can take this color ramp color, and we can put this into the strength of the emission, and I'll Control Shift select the emission to preview it. So the white parts are going to be brighter, and then the darker parts are going to be less bright. You can see if I turn this way down, this color way down, you can see it's fully black, so it's not emitting light. But if it's fully white, it'll be emitting a lot of light. Now it's not actually that bright right now, and I want to kind of blow it out because candles are really bright. So what I'm going to do is search for a math node, and we'll put the math node here after the color ramp, and on the add type, we're going to change this to multiply. Now we can turn up the value, and I'm going to turn up the value to 10 so it's really bright. And then we will be adding a bloom later in the compositor to make it kind of glowing. So we'll box select these nodes, we'll join them into a frame, and I'll add a label, and I'll just call this brightness, or you can call it flame brightness. So now what I want to do is make a little bit of transparency, because if you look at real candles, they're a bit more transparent, and they're especially transparent on the bottom. So what I want to do is drag the material output back, and I'm going to search for a mix shader. We'll drop this here, and then what I can do is search for the transparent shader. We can put the transparent into the bottom one and the emission into the top one. So now if I drag the factor, you can see it's fully transparent or fully emission. So what I want to do is add another gradient to make it more transparent on the bottom. So what we're going to do is search for another color ramp. We'll drop the color ramp down here. We can take the gradient texture color and put that into the factor. Let's Control Shift select the color ramp to preview it. And I want to drag the color ramp out so it's really long so I can control it better. And then let's flip these 2 values. So the white tab is going to be way over here, and then the black tab is going to be right over here. And I'm going to drag it really close like that. So I can now take the color ramp color, and we're going to put that into the factor. And let's just preview the mix shader. So you can see wherever the white part was, that is where it's going to be transparent, but wherever the black part is, it's going to be fully visible. So I'm going to drag this way over just like that, so it kind of slowly kind of fades out and then is invisible on the bottom. And I should have mentioned this earlier, but if for some reason your gradient isn't really at the correct spot of the object, that is because of the origin point. So the gradient is going to be at the center of the origin. You can see if I drag this way down, now you can see the gradient has moved, or if I drag it up here, basically the center of the gradient is going to be wherever the origin point is. So just kind of move the object around in edit mode so the origin point is right about there, so that's where the gradient is going to be. And then what I also want to do is search for a hue saturation value, and I can just drop this right here before the color ramp. And you can see we now have this value, so if I drag this up and down, that is going to give us a customizable value to control the transparency. So let's just drag this smaller, so we'll box select these nodes, join them into a frame, we can give this a label, and I'll just call this transparency. Now the last thing that I want to do is add a noise into the displacement to kind of make it actually bumpy, and we can actually animate the flame so it's kind of wobbling around. So what I'm going to do is search for a noise texture, drop this here, and we can take the mapping, which is using the object coordinates, and we can plug this into the vector. Now let's Control Shift select the noise texture to preview it. Now on the 3D here, I'm going to change this to 4D instead, and this will give us this W value which we can animate, and this is going to move the noise texture around randomly so you can see it gets lighter and darker. And then here on the scale, I'm going to turn this to 3, but I'll leave the other settings how they are. So let's now search for a displacement, and we'll drop this right here. And we want the noise texture factor to be going into the height value. That's going to convert it to displacement data, and then the displacement can go into the displacement of the material output, and the shader can go back to the surface. So it's not actually popping out the mesh. That's because we need to open up the side panel, and we need to go to the material settings, and we need to scroll down here, and we need to open up the settings and then go to surface. And on the bump only, we need to change this to displacement and bump, and this is telling the material that it can use the displacements. So now you can see it's popping out way too much. So let's turn this scale value way down to a 0.5 0.015, just a 0.015. So if I zoom in here, you can see it's just being displaced a little bit, but now if I animate this W value, it's just going to move the flame around a bit randomly. So we can box select these nodes, add them into a frame, we can add a label, and I'll just call this displace. If you want to, you could also join these into a frame here, join these 3 nodes, and you could call that shader. So that is it for the procedural material. So let's now join it together into a node group. So I'm going to click and drag to box select all the nodes, and I'll hit Ctrl G to join it together into a node group. Let's hit the tab key here outside the node group, and I'll drag this over here. Let's make it a bit bigger, and then I can copy the material name and add it here into the node group. Let's hit the tab key to go into the node group, and I'll hit the N key to open up the side panel, and let's go over here to the group input, and we can plug all the values up to the group input that we want to control. So the first value that I want to control is the brightness of the flames. So let's drag this right down here, and I can take the multiply value right here. We can put the value into the extra socket here. Let's double click on this to rename it. And I'll just call this flame brightness. Then I want to control the transparency. So we're going to take this hue saturation value. The value is going to make it lighter and darker. So that's going to control the transparency. So we'll put the value into the extra socket, and let's rename this to transparency. Then I want to control the edge thickness. So we'll drag this right up here behind the edges, and we're going to drag the layer weight over. And what I'm going to do is search for a hue saturation value, and I'll put this in between the layer weight and the color ramp. And that has this value, so if I drag the value up and down, that's going to make it brighter and darker. So if you look here on the edges, that's going to control that edge there. So we'll put the value into the extra socket. And here on the side panel, I'll rename that to edge brightness. So outside of the node group, that's going to kind of make that orangey color a bit stronger. So let's go back into the node group. Let's now add the custom colors. So you can see here on this mix color and this mix color, color A is the same exact color. So I'm going to put color A into the extra socket, and then this color A, I'm going to put that into the same exact socket. So this value right here is going to control both of them at once. And then if we open up the side panel, go right over here, let's rename this to color 1. And then let's take the mix color, we'll put color B into the extra socket. And this one I'll just rename to color 2. Then I want to control some of the noise settings. So let's take the group input and drag it right over here. And let's zoom in here. And I'm going to take the scale and the detail and put those into the extra sockets. And then I can just rename this to noise scale. And I'll rename this one to noise detail. Then I want to add the animatable noise value. So we'll take the W, we'll put that into the extra socket, and I'll rename this to animate noise. And then finally, we can control the displacement strength. So we'll put the scale into the extra socket, and I'll rename that to displacement strength. So let's just zoom out here, and I'll drag the node group right at the very end, and I'll hit tab to go out the node group, and I'll hit the N key to close the side panel. So now we can just preview the final material. So we have the brightness of the flame. We also have the transparency if you want to make it more transparent. We also have that edge brightness, and then we have color 1, so you could make it more of like a red color or more white. And then we also have color 2, which is kind of that inner color. Then we have the noise scale, so you can see if I turn this way down, it looks too noisy. And then we also have the noise detail. Then we also have the animate noise value, so you can just animate this and just make it slowly kind of move around. And then we also have the displacement strength to pop out the mesh. So before we finish the tutorial, I'm going to show you how to add a glare in the compositor, and then we'll also be animating this. So let's click over here to go to the compositing workspace. We'll click on use nodes, and then I'll go to the add menu, and I'm going to search for the glare node. Let's just drop this right here, and then I'll Control Shift select the glare node, and that's going to add a viewer node so we can preview it in the background. Now we need to render the scene, so let's open up the side panel, and we'll go here to the render settings, and we'll go to the sampling, and here on the render samples, I'm going to turn the render samples to 200, and then I'm also going to turn on the denoise so it denoises the image. So you can save the file and then click on render and render the image. And the image has finished rendering, so let's just hit the escape key and that'll go back to the compositor. I'll hit the V key to zoom out the backdrop. So now here on the streaks, I'm going to change this to bloom because I like that better, but it's way too bright. So what I can do is turn the size down to like a 4, and then I can also drag this mix down. And if I drag the mix down, it's also going to be a bit smaller. So I'm going to make it a negative 0.7, just a negative 0.7. And then also you can drag around the threshold if you want to, but I'm going to leave it how it is. So now you can see here it is before and then here it is after. So there's just a tiny little bit of brightness to the candle. And actually for this scene, I think maybe turning down the size to like a 3 would look better because I definitely don't want it to be too bright. So now let's click right back over here to go to the layout, and I can go into the rendered viewport mode, and to see the glare, let's just click on the drop down here, and then we'll click on the compositor and change it to always. So now we can actually see the glow in the viewport. So now to animate this, we need to click right over here to go to the shading workspace. And I need to click right here in the corner when that little crosshair appears with my mouse, and I'll click and drag down to split the window. And then if I click right behind me to change the editor type, let's change this to the timeline. I can also click right here and drag over and then let go, and that's going to split the window here. So now we have a timeline on the bottom. So I'm going to start on frame 1. And here on the animate noise, I'm going to hover my mouse over the value and hit the I key. Then what I'm going to do is go all the way over to the end frame, so 250. And I find that for a 250 frame animation at 24 frames per second, I find that turning the animate noise value to a 1.5 looks pretty good. So I'm going to turn it to 1.5 and then hit the I key to add a keyframe. Now you can't actually see the keyframe in the timeline. That's because you need to select the node group and then also select the object. And now you can see the keyframes. So let's go into the rendered viewport mode and play this. So you can now see the candles kind of moving around, but you can see it's moving around really fast in the middle and then it kind of slows down. That is because of the keyframe interpolation. So if I select the keyframes with the A key and then hit the T key, let's change the keyframe interpolation to linear. And this way it'll play at a consistent speed. Now if you're wondering how to render this out to images and then compile the frames together into a video editor and render it out to a final video, I have a separate tutorial on how to render out a 3D animation to a video file in Blender. So if you want to check out that video, I'll have the link to it in the description. So I hope you found this tutorial helpful and thank you for watching. And if you'd like to purchase the finished project files, you can get that with the links in the description, and that's a great way to help support this channel. You can also check out my ultimate Blender procedural material pack if you'd like to purchase all of my materials. And to learn how to create more procedural materials, you can check out my Blender procedural material tutorial playlist here on YouTube. So I hope you found this helpful, and thank you for watching.